Hello, and welcome to the Gravel Ride podcast, where we go deep on the sport of gravel cycling through in-depth interviews with product designers, event organizers, and athletes who are pioneering the sport. I'm your host, Craig Dalton, a lifelong cyclist who discovered gravel cycling back in 2016 and made all the mistakes you don't need to make. I approach each episode as a beginner to unlock all the knowledge you need to become a great gravel cyclist. This week on the podcast, we welcome Tomas Castrillon from Arriba Cycling Tours in Colombia. Super excited to finally release this episode. Big apologies to Tomas for how long it's taken to get it out the door. Full disclosure, I've been absent from the microphone for the last 6 weeks, finally getting my preparations done and executing on my Unbound 200 effort. More on that next week, but I'm sorry I haven't been around. It just proved to be a little bit too much. And unfortunately, Tomas and this great episode talking about gravel cycling in Colombia had to wait. So I hope you enjoy it. Before we jump in, I did need to thank my friends at Athletic Greens. It was funny, the day after Unbound, my buddy saw me dumping some AG1 into a bottle in the morning after, and he said, "You do use AG1. Sure enough, I've been an avid AG1 user for about a decade now. It just simplified my life. It replaced any vitamins and multivitamins I was taking, and it just did it in one simple scoop. It covers all my nutritional bases and sets myself up for success in under 60 seconds. It's easily one of my longest running health habits. So if you want to replace your multivitamin and more, start with AG1. Try AG1 today and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3 and K2 and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first subscription at drinkag1.com/thegravelride. That's drinkag1.com/thegravelride. Check it out today. With that business behind us, let's jump right into my conversation with Tomas. Tomas, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Craig. How are you?
I'm doing great. And good evening to you. I'm super excited to have this conversation. We've been chatting a few minutes offline, and I was just sharing, and the listener knows this well, I love gravel travel. I just love the idea of exploration in foreign lands by bike, and in particular, the kind of versatility a drop bar gravel bike gives you in your exploration.
Of course, it's great. What is it that attracts you about traveling with your bicycle? I mean, you mentioned it a little bit, but what's like? Let's put it this way: what has been like the greatest adventure that you have had while traveling with a gravel bicycle so far?
I think it's just, it's the idea that culture can unfold slowly. So
Yeah.
as a tourist, you might go to a city and you might read a tourist map and go do this, that, and the other
Mm-hmm.
things. But there's so many things in between that a
Mm-hmm.
bike enables you to see along the way. And
Yeah.
obviously, as gravel cyclists, we're looking to get out into the wilderness and out into destinations unknown. And surely if the route is well designed, you're
Mm.
going well off the beaten path. So
Correct.
you're interacting with a part of the culture that may not see so many foreign travelers.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to get a really authentic experience versus sort of a whitewashed tourist experience you might get in a major city.
Correct. And what has been like the place that you said like, oh, I want to come back to this place, or is there a place that you said like, oh, I would love to go and see that place on my gravel bicycle?
Well, I'm going to give you two answers. One self-serving in this conversation is Colombia, which is where I'm talking to you from.
Great.
And we'll get to that and why I have that in my head.
Good.
Second is Girona. I went to Girona last year in
Mm-hmm.
Spain, and I think there's miles and miles of gravel to explore there. And
Mm-hmm.
Girona itself is a great city hub for
Mm-hmm.
these kind of adventures. So as someone who, I enjoy being in European cities, so you can have enough of that in the evenings, but still
Mm-hmm.
go spend your entire day riding your head off into
Great.
the Spanish countryside.
Of course. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that like coming a little bit back to me, I fell in love with cycling like from a very early age. Maybe you're aware of this. Like you were telling me before we started this conversation that your father used to be a racer, but there was this wave of Colombian cyclists back in the 80s, and they were like, I'm 42 now. I was 5 when these guys were storming they were doing so well in the pro tour, and for me it was like, oh my god, I really want to do that. I really want to ride my bicycle. And my family on my father's side lives in Medellin. On my mother's side lives in Manizales, so they are far apart in terms of, it's particularly time, because moving around these mountains can take a lot of time. And so for me, it was like my mind was absolutely captured by, my imagination was captured by like these mountains and how they were. And ever since, it was like for me a constant sense of exploration that bicycles brings into my life. It's still going on, and as I tell you, it was like from a very early age that I caught the bug for cycling. So
Yeah, at this point in 2024, the sort of history of Colombian cycling is certainly in the Pro Tour is well known. There have been some grand champions and some
mhm,
phenomenal riders from Colombia. Is there a part of Colombia, for those of us whose geography might be
mhm,
struggling to understand the
mhm.
country, talk a little bit about the country and maybe are there hubs of cycling in Colombia that generally speaking were graduating these phenomenal cyclists?
Well, yes, like just to give you a broad idea, like Colombia, or better, the Andes Mountains, once they arrive into Colombia, they split into 3 branches. The East Branch, that is the one that in Bogota is located, the Central Branch, and as I'm having as a reference point, Medellin might be the best reference point for that one. And then there is the West Branch of the Cordillera. You have like pockets of cycling development all across the country. Okay, so there is people from Bogota that are super strong, people from Boyacá. So to give the audience a little bit of an idea, Nairo Quintana, these guys are from Boyacá. Well, Nairo Quintana particularly is from Boyacá. And then you have people from the other branches of the Cordillera. So you have people like from Medellin, like Rigo. So, but in general, like cycling is so big in Colombia that you get cyclists from all across the country. So even places that are relatively flat, and we do have a lot of flats in Colombia, particularly closer to the north side of the country, close to cities like Cartagena. So it's more like Caribbean and all this kind of atmosphere. There are cyclists over there as well. So actually, cycling in Colombia, it's so big that it's really actually hard to grasp. I'm local. I ride my bicycle almost every day. I'm surprised sometimes by the sheer number of cyclists that you can see on the road. It's might be in the team we have like this joke that there are so many uh, uh, I forgot the one in English, so many hobos cycling their bicycle all across Colombia, because you see somebody riding their bicycle full kit on in the middle of nowhere at a time that you were supposed to be doing some work, and you will find always somebody riding their bicycle. And that's even more so on places like, I'm coming back to your question, like big cities, Bogota, Medellin, Manizales, the coffee hub region. All of those places have a really strong cycling culture regardless. So I think that when you think of a country that has like this super strong background in cycling, I would say that Colombia. It's like, in my experience and having traveled a little bit in Europe, in other places of the world, I would say like Colombia is still like, it's the best place for riding a bicycle, and it's amazing the number of people that get uh, like how not only the cyclists per se, but actually the whole society. So one thing that we have in our tours, and I mean, still surprising, is how encouraging and how our relationships with cycling, or between cyclists and drivers, is so positive compared to other places in the world. Because I mean, I'm not saying that it's 100% perfect, but
Yeah.
the number of cases of road rage that we face, it's very limited compared to, I mean, the number of cases that you would see are very limited compared to the number of cyclists that you will see on the streets, right? So that's one very important thing about Colombia as a whole.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. Going back to you personally, you mentioned sort of becoming aware of these great Colombian cycling stars and wanting to do it yourself.
Yeah.
As a child, what was your pathway into the sport? Were there clubs and different local organizations that helped foster your interest, or was it a solo endeavor that you pursued?
I think that for all cyclists in Colombia, it's changing a little bit, but for many of us, particularly for my generation, it was basically a solo path. I would say I joke around this one as well. Is that cycling used to be a nerd sport, and I love it when it was nerd. I was very nerdy at school, and I really loved that about cycling. I mean, I loved like the people that are my friends from bicycles. All of them are freaks. So so the point of that one is that there was really not an established path. I did race a little bit, but it was basically on my own, without a coach, without anything. It was never really an established pursuit. Like what I was really, really attracted to about the bicycle was basically the state of mind that it created for me. Like the searching for that experience that is completely ungraspable, but you really know that that is there. Like the beauty of the terrain, the beauty of the physical effort, the conquering the mountain, stuff that we all cyclists can relate to. It was never really there was really not a competitive edge on my behalf about cycling. It was more like a sort of a meditation kind of activity, and a personal search for a way to to exert myself, to really get tired and like put my demons to rest, sort of speaking.
Got it. And how did you arrive at the idea to create a bicycle travel company, Arriba Travel?
Well, it was basically a little bit by chance. Like those are like the random paths that life takes you on. And there was definitely a side of me that always wanted to be related to bicycles. I never really wanted to be a part of uh, like the corporate world per se. I really wanted to instead be part of something that I would find beautiful, in the broad sense of the word. So for me, that was cycling. So like 14, 15 years ago, I was helping some friends develop an international, like the first proper international race here in Colombia. And that led into some other connections with the tourism side of that kind of events. And that created some opportunities. So, I mean, it's complete. Like I would say that like all those steps are sort of random, but there were like it was at the same time there were also the work that I put into like making those random events come into like the fruition of like what is now Arriba Travel. So basically that's where we are now, and in a way that's still the philosophy that I still bring into a company, that it's like a place for to foster the sense of exploration that we all have in within. So uh, gravel, as you said, like has just enhanced that part of my personal desire to take my that desire for a new adventure a little bit further, right? So that's how that's how I came into a sort of tourism side of it. But really, in the end, it's basically thinking about like, okay, what are the places that I want to go for myself, and if I would take a friend of mine, would I take them that way, or is that the most beautiful road that I can make it? Is basically that the question that I'm answering all the time when I'm thinking about a trip.
I love it. What year did the travel business start for you?
It started as a travel business. We did our first big road bike tour in 2011. So to give the audience a little bit of perspective, we were like basically the first company that did something as big as this one. It was a 2 week trip from Bogota to Cartagena, so by the by the Caribbean coast, and it was 2 weeks long, and that was with a UK based agency that we work, and we are still working with them. So yeah, so that's how it started. It started basically as many of us in the industry, like as something on the side,
Yep.
and all of the sudden it started to grow and into becoming what is it now.
Amazing. A 2 week long trip. That's quite an adventure.
Yes, it is. Yes, I mean, and it still is. It still is because one of the things that I was telling you about Colombia is that, I mean, people don't really understand, and it's very, very hard for people to understand how big really Colombia is. So Colombia, when you put it together, or when you compare it, is the size of Portugal, Spain, France, Belgium, and Netherlands all together.
Oh,
So
wow.
when you put all that together, you realize that you really can have a 1,000 kilometer tour on the spot. It's basically that big that Colombia can get.
Yeah, with
And
three big mountain ranges to choose
exactly,
from as
yes,
well. You've got some tough days in there, I imagine.
yes, exactly. I mean, and yes, tough, beautiful, everything all at once. It's incredible.
You mentioned that first tour, those first tours were on the road. When did you
Yep.
start thinking about getting off road with clients?
Well, my background as a cyclist is more on the mountain bike scene. So as I was telling you, I was very interested as a kid in the sense of adventure. So come the 90s, and the first mountain bikes start to show up here in Colombia, and on these family trips, I would see, I don't know, a path road that would go into the mountains, and I was always curious. Okay, where does that path leads to? So for me, mountain biking was always this first love that I had for cycling. Uh, and yes, like the first thing that really caught my attention. Like, okay, I really want to do this because I really want to explore even further that I have ever been, or in places that are not traditional, sort of speaking. So in 2000, I started watching on TV the adventure races, and it really blew my mind. Like this sort of endurance, the sense of adventure that these events brought. So I started to do a little bit of those events, and at the same time, I started to befriend people that were doing a little bit of what we currently call gravel. So it's basically, it was off-road riding on dirt paths. So it was, and I'm bringing this, and it was early 2000 when I started to say, okay, I want to go and explore with these guys other parts of the country. So there was always that in my mind, and for me it was still like this sense of exploration. So 10 12 years ago we started doing road cycling, but I always felt that itching, like to tell people there is also one beautiful side of Colombia that it's absolutely magnificent, and it's even more challenging perhaps that a road bike trip. And it was, and I have to admit to everybody, like in the beginning, I was very dubious about the gravel thing, because for me it was like, is this either mountain biking and road cycling? It was not clear. And to be fair, uh, seeing the terrain in Colombia, it's still very complicated sometimes to define it. Okay, this is road cycling, or this is mountain.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is gravel cycling, or this is mountain biking. When you have a 15-kilometer climb at 10%, I mean, probably sometimes for some people, a gravel bicycle might be a little bit under geared, as you
Yeah.
were mentioning. But I started to doing it, and I started to think of it like, okay, this is a great way for me to. I mean, there was sort of the market opportunity. It was growing as a trend in cycling. So, and basically it made sense at some point. Like, okay, we have just after the pandemics, I was like, we really have to do something that is gravel related. I was getting my proper gravel bicycle, and I was like, okay, I think that there is some merit to having a new category in the whole industry, and I was completely sold on the idea of gravel bicycle for myself. Therefore, as I was telling you, once I'm sold on myself, I can tell, like, okay, I want to take people to go and do all these great adventures great safe adventures that I want to create. So for me, that was the case. That was basically the case on how it became from an idea, a little bit of of personal history, and combining them into creating a sort of a business opportunity.
So now you've got the gravel bike and you're sort of able to free your mind of thinking, okay, I don't only need to be on the road, but I can go on the trail.
Exactly.
You shared with me a really fantastic looking gravel trip. Talk to us about how you sort of conceived of the route and give some details. Where are we starting? What are we experiencing in that trip?
So how it started, or how, like, basically for all trips, like how I start to think of a great way to connect two spots, like so two big spots on the map, right? So you, like, some people know about Colombia and some people know about Bogota, and for example Medellin is getting all this attention at this moment. So you start thinking, okay, I want to create an itinerary that connects these two dots on the map, and 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 you realize that, and I know that, okay, we have had an itinerary that connects Bogota to Medellin on the road for, I mean, it's our flagship trip, it's still our best selling trip, but there is still these people that want to take the adventure a little bit further. So I basically start to think and trying to imagine how a route like this one will be, and I just start putting the pieces together and creating an itinerary that is going to be both challenging and beautiful and has everything that I want about a cycling trip, like great accommodation all around the road, because that's actually one of the hardest things to sort out in Colombia. We are still, particularly in rural areas, we are still lacking, like, the tourism infrastructure in many places. So when you're thinking about putting together a trip, like, you have to deal with all these constraints and find, like, the best route that really makes people happy to come over and makes people safe to come over, and it's a route that is interesting, and it's a route that has many uh, uh, points, that many places that can be a landmark for people to see. So when thinking about that this trip in particular, I would start looking into a route, and so I know that I want to get away from, like, usually what I want to see is for people to test their test their stamina quite a few times over these mountains. So going up and down, and finding, like, being captivated by this country as much as I am, right? So that's basically how it begins, and how it really develops into finding the best path for that one.
I'm
And
always
so,
curious when
go
you're,
ahead.
when you're bringing a group of mixed people who don't know one another to a trip. It's often difficult to assess people's abilities and kind of
Yeah,
create the right amount of climbing and descending
yeah,
and technical abilities. I know, I recall on one trip I went on prior to signing up, they sort of gave us a little roadmap, like, you ought to be able to do this if you're going to enjoy this trip. And I thought that was
yeah,
interesting. Gravel is so complicated because, you can have the best road cyclists who can go uphill super
yeah,
fast, but the moment they get off road, they may be challenged. Or
yeah,
ironically, maybe when they start going down the hill, that's when they're terrified. They go uphill really
yeah,
fast, but going downhill is really complicated. So
yeah.
I'm curious if there's any sort of guidelines you put out there in advance for riders to make sure they're going to have the skills to have an enjoyable time.
Well, we try to create a brochure that has, like, all the details, like, to give you a real perspective on that one. It's never going to be easy because, as you know, like, the terrain can change. For some people, can thrive on wet conditions, and somebody can be scared to death on a dirt path
Yeah.
that is washed out, right? So it's very, very complicated, and that's when I think that the support team really comes into play. To make you feel like you can do it. Like, what we can come into this one later, but the name of the company is about that, inspiring people, and I know that we are all capable of things that we really sometimes don't think that we are capable of doing it. So there is always, like, this sort of encouragement side from the team, like, to make sure that like, for people to feel comfortable about, like, stepping outside of their comfort zone, right? So I really want people sometimes to, I mean, they might they might achieve it or they might not, but to at least to give it a try. And for us as a team, is basically to give people the tools for doing that. Basically, that's where that's basically what we're trying to do. So in those cases, it's and particularly on a gravel trip, it's basically offering enough support for everybody. Either for the fast riders, like fast in terms of gravel or fast in terms of road cycling, that they can go up very fast, or or for those who might be struggling a little bit more. Like trying to find this balance is absolutely the art of putting a trip together. Like trying to find some nice details that can help people enjoy their experience. And in the end, like this is something that I tell everybody. Like I know uh, that people, like particularly if you're riding at the back, you might get a little bit worked up because you feel, oh, I'm dragging the rest of the group, or I'm being the slowest rider. And I tell people, don't worry about it. Like or the fastest riders are going to get upset with me, and I'm like, don't worry. It's our work to make sure that everybody gets the ride that they deserve, right, regardless of like their skill level. And B, like, and this happens all the time. It's like, or it, at least it has been my case, is that in the end we are all cyclists and we all recognize the different stages that we are in our development as cyclists, right? And in the end, it's particularly when you're thinking about a bike trip, it's making sure that we are all sharing this experience all together as a team, right? So I'm creating that kind of atmosphere of, okay, this is teamwork, sort of talking without and let me be very clear about it, without making like the super fast guy like going 1 kilometer an hour. It's never not the point. It's like for everybody to enjoy at their own pace, right? So it's for us as a team to create like the conditions for everybody to enjoy, and for a team to come together and say like, it regardless of our level, we are all going to have a great time riding our bicycle.
Yeah, I think
So
as you
that
said,
basically,
there's definitely an art to it as a travel service provider, making sure that you can find a way for everybody to have fun regardless of their ability level. Let's talk
correct.
let's talk specifics on this gravel trip. So where are you starting? What is, I assume you're starting in a sort of larger city or community, and then you're going
Yeah.
out into the wilderness. Just talk us through a little
Yes,
bit of that.
correct. Yeah, sure. Like the trip, as I was telling you, is Bogota to Medellin. We start just north of Bogota. Like the sprawl of Bogota as a city is very big, and so we are not riding properly in Bogota, but it's an international airport. So if you're flying from the U.S., it's very easy to access. And we move just north of the city, and we start moving, and we are first like trying to going west basically. So we are basically going up and down, like the first two stages we are going up and down the cordilleras. And so the cordilleras, it's really like the mountain range itself. So it's going is you know, you really don't find an end to them until you really are at the bottom of the cordilleras. And how you know it is because you have arrived into a big valley, and with either the Magdalena River or the Cauca River. Those two rivers are from a socioeconomical point of view, are the biggest rivers the most important rivers in Colombia. So for our American audience, think of them as the Mississippi River is that big or that important for us, particularly the Magdalena and the Cauca, actually. But both of them are like that big. So you're always going up and down until you get to the Magdalena River. Then we move alongside the Magdalena River for one full stage. So uh, it's one stage of very hot rollers. I mean, I would say that is never really an easy day. We try to make it as sort of a recovery day, because if you would see at the profiles, we have one big day. The first day, it's about 1,800 meters. So it's about 6,000 feet
Yeah.
at altitude. So a lot of climbing still involved on over 50 miles or so, like 45 miles. And the terrain can change constantly. It's half of it, it's paved, the other half it's a proper gravel. and you're always mixing these two terrains. And that's stage number one. Stage number two, it's a little bit more. It has more climbing. It's closer to 9,000 feet of climbing in overall over the day, and sometimes it can get very muddy. These areas, they are like why Colombia is also known. It's for its biodiversity. And to be this biodiverse as Colombia is, it has to be extremely wet at times. So it can get very wet or very cold or very hot. So it's sunny, but at the same time, a lot of water is flowing into these mountains. So sometimes the roads can get muddy even without rain. So it's basically like that, and we get into the Magdalena River as I was telling you about, and then we have the other side of the Cordillera, which is generally upwards. Like the stages itself are also in those 2,000 meters to 3,000 meters, both of them into either one very, very big landmark that is the Piedra del Peñol, and the other one, the other stage is basically getting into Medellin. So it's basically finding our way into this maze of the roads, because in Colombia we do have paved roads, and I'm not saying otherwise, but the majority of our roads are gravel, and it's how these small communities connect between each other and with major urban centers, right? So, and this is I think that's what really struck me the most when I first did the route as a whole, is that when you're doing the Bogota to Medellin route, uh, on the road, you feel like you're going basically on a very, very straight road, sort of speaking. I mean, if these mountains would allow such thing, like you're trying to basically maximize your speed, while these smaller roads are like a caress to a terrain. So you're never going like straight from the village A to village B, but instead you are going from the farm of Don Jose to the farm of Don Julio, then down again to the farm. So you're always
Yeah.
up and down, like going over, like finding your way across the mountains. And I think that's still is what strikes me the most, is how variable the terrain can get, how beautiful the views can get, and how constantly you are challenged with all these all these aspects of the road.
How many days is the trip in total?
In total, I mean, it's 5 stages and 7 days long, the trip.
Okay, great. And talk a little bit about those local communities that you'll be going through. Like as we were talking about earlier, maybe it was offline, you sort of go into a culture and maybe you see a city, but in this
Mhm.
experience, we're getting out there into the wilderness. So talk about
Yeah.
the communities and maybe the accommodations along the way and the foods that you might experience.
Well, yes, look, so these are very rural communities. So and some of them, like all of these communities, are agricultural communities. So each one of them has a special crop along the side, and they are known for uh, one particular crop. I mean, since we're hitting several of these small towns, it's all of them have a special thing to them, right? So we get to see some coffee growers, we get to see some vegetables, like peas and all this other stuff. Like it's the number of communities is as wide as the terrain. I mean, it's changing constantly, and other places there is sugar cane, other places are, for example, the bank of a river that was transformed into a dam, and so it's into a dam. So it's still pre-Sylvatic. So it's constantly changing. Like there is everything that you can think about it. So, for example, the communities at the top of the mountains, they are known for wearing like these big ponchos. And some very old people actually still use a hat, but very, very tiny, and as a mean of being very well put together. and while the people in the valleys, in the hot valleys, they are basically just on jeans and a shirt and with a big hat, trying to find a way to cover themselves from the heat. So it's changing constantly. The colors at the top of the mountain might be a little bit darker, earthly like, so greens, browns and all that. While at the bottom it can be completely colorful, right? So it's constantly changing, and I think that that's the thing that is more interesting about Colombia. It's so diverse and as I was telling you, there is so many things to see in Colombia and it's so big that is never really one thing to go over the specific of that. Having said that, so we are still a cycling tour company, and we pride ourselves on offering a premium bike tours, right? So the accommodations that we have found for this trip are all these boutique places that have farms that have been, like, many of them are farms that have been turned into hotels. So it's like some of them have absolutely fantastic views, and we're staying in these very small places that usually when a tour comes in, we are basically booking the whole place for ourselves, and so it's like that the whole time. So it's a great balance, I would say, because it's having the opportunity of a great ride during the day of what's Colombia like, but at the end of the day, we also want to have a very comfortable bed and a great place to have food and to share our experiences, and that's what we're fostering, like this kind of wholesome experience where we bring all this together.
What type of cuisine do you like to serve the
The,
guests?
well, we serve everything. Like we go. I mean, it's our cuisine. Uh, like the cuisine that you get in many of these villages is very peasants like. So the stuff that these guys usually have, and what is mostly accessible is rice, beans, plantains. That's usually like this like the peasants food that you'll find in towns. Once we are in hotels and all that, we try to aim for, and of course, like we also have a very strong culture of steak, regardless. So we are. I mean, it's peasants food, so it's agricultural in the sense that it's um, that it's very traditional in that regard. Uh, and when we get to the hotels, we have a little bit more of an international flavor to it. So again, the whole thing is to share an experience, like have some wine, enjoy ourselves, like have like some balance, like of course like the traditional Colombian life, but also what we would be used to, as you were saying, in Girona or any other place. Like, okay, I want to have a proper meal and have clean myself up and having a great time, right?
Yeah, of course. If you had to think about this trip, are there any favorite personal locations or moments that you would highlight?
All of them. No, no, I think that, and it might be a joke, but I, and it happens to me on all these trips, because usually when I'm briefing people, it's like, oh, I love this day. I mean, it's very hard for me to say like, oh no, there is a stage that I really don't like, because there is always this constantly changing landscape. There is always constantly new challenges that are ahead. So it's very hard for me, like, to say, oh, I particularly like one stage or the other. I love them all, and all of them have taught me one thing or the other at some point. So it's very hard for me to say, oh, this is my favorite stage. I would say that having said that, I would say that the second stage is absolutely beautiful, like, but the third stage as well, like, I mean, it's so complicated. It's so complicated. Very hard to say. Oh, to ping on one
Yeah,
just
I'd
one
expect
stage.
nothing less, right? We're coming to your country. We want you to show us the best we can experience. So it's not
Yeah,
surprising that you
yeah.
love it all. Final question is just around the
I have a
yeah, go ahead, Tomas.
Yeah. Well, because you say like, oh, I want to go to Colombia. Yes, tell me. I'm very, very curious about
Yeah, so
what attracts you about Colombia.
so I guess my history with Colombia and sort of interest in going there goes back a long way. So in college, I had a classmate who was from Bogota, Colombia, and he was a
Uh
big
huh.
soccer
Yep.
player, and it just sort of talked about, yeah, how much fun he had growing up there and how much he loved his culture. Then fast
Mm-hmm.
forward probably a decade or more, my wife worked for an international technology company, and she had a project in
Mm-hmm.
Colombia. And
Mm-hmm.
I was actually booked on a ticket to meet her in Cartagena at one point,
Mm-hmm.
and then something happened, and I was unable to join her on that trip. And so I literally
Sorry
had
to
the
hear
ticket in my hand to go to Colombia and
that.
didn't make it. And then over the course of this podcast, I've had the pleasure of interviewing the team from Scarab Cycles.
Scar.
So I
Yep.
got to talk to
Yep.
them and met them. They were at the Envy Builder Roundup in Utah.
Yep.
And it reminded me, and they
Yep.
were just talking about how the climbing in Colombia is amazing. And then when you get off road, it's just a spectacular country. And then I also interviewed someone who wrote a bikepacking route for bikepacking.com
Mm.
around Colombia.
Yep.
So I remember I just took away
Yep.
little bits from all these experiences, saying like, this is definitely a place I would love to go to.
Yes, it's amazing. It's amazing as I was telling you, and I try to be as unbiased as I can about it, because I think that we were off microphone. We were talking about a bovine classic in Paso Robles, which is a great event, and I love it. But but I think that the thing about Colombia it's that it's absolutely impossible to tell you and to grasp how big it is. Like it's absolutely impossible. Just once you're here, you are like, oh wow, this is just so massive. Like
Yeah.
there is really no words about it. It's impossible to put it into one single word or one single uh, uh, storytelling about Colombia is really something that you would have to experience. And not, and for example, as your former classmate was telling you, like for example, the warmth of the people, a positive vibe, people like it's really not about the riding itself. It's about the destination. It's about the experience that I think that. I mean, I'm still completely in love with, and again, I'm riding my bicycle all across the country, like 12 months during the year. And that's another thing that it's important. It's that like we really do have the temperature is not going to change that
Yeah.
much. So it's really like a matter of being prepared, like having a jacket and like the annoyances of the rain, but it's never really that cold. It's always entertaining. It's always uh, beautiful. And as I was telling you, how 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 the landscapes, the people, like make a really an experience that is so hard to think about in other places. I would say that that's the beauty of it, and I really do hope that at some point you can make it over.
Yeah.
And we
I was just going to say, I
good.
hope many of us who are listening today can ultimately find ourselves in Colombia on one of your tours at some point, because it sounds magical.
Great. Yes, great. Thank you so much for having me over, Greg. Do you have any more
No, I
questions
appreciate you
or
sharing the
like?
story, and I'll make sure everybody knows how to find you and digs into the details of this
G-
wonderful trip you've designed.
Good. Thank you so much. Yes, it's my pleasure. I'm really looking forward to like start getting more people on our gravel bicycle tours, because it's really another side of Colombia. It's really another side of Colombia, and of course Colombia has had like this bad history over the years, and coming back to my experience and I was riding my bicycle during the most troubled times in Colombia. I was riding my bicycle on dirt paths in Colombia during the most troubled times in Colombia. And I still think that, regardless of that, cycling got like this aura of invincibility around it. Like it was like common ground for everybody. And this is a like to close it up. Like I think that it's worth telling you. With my friends that we used to do adventure racing. I do remember one time that we were in an area that we weren't supposed to be in, and it was the middle of the night, like really 10, 11 p.m. or something. No, it was closer to midnight. It was or 1 p.m. or 1 a.m. whatever. I really still don't. And it was an absolutely beautiful full moon, and we got to this place, and these guys that were like, what are you doing here, like, but and you know that these were the bad guys are quoting them, but they were like so touched by the fact that somebody was willing to get to know their side of the story, that were like they just were super friendly to us. So this so for me, that what that story conveys is that in the end, Colombia, it's such a magical place. Like it really, when once you start hearing about the stories about Colombia, we would say like, no, it's not possible. Yes, it's possible. Like here in Colombia, everything is possible. It's really mind blowing. And I'm sorry, I'm lacking like a more uh, uh, colorful language to express it, but it really it's really it's a place that, oh sorry, it really it's a place that that really goes beyond your imagination, and the places that we go are absolutely stunning. And fortunately, it's super safe. It's like things have improved so much for the best, that it really a place that you should really aim to come over if you can.
Love it. Thanks, Tomas.
Thank you, Greg, for having me. It was great to talking to
You
you.
too. That's going to do it for this week's edition of the Gravel Ride podcast. Big thanks to Tomas for coming on board and telling us all about his beautiful country in Colombia. It really comes out in the conversation how much passion he has for Colombia and how fantastic the riding experiences can be there. So I hope you check it out. I'll put a link in the show notes to all his materials. Until next time, here's to finding some dirt under your wheels.